Yeah, you're good, right there. That's good. All right, well, let's get this started. Boy, this has been so fantastic to get to restart the ONRC evening talks. It's been what, 2.5 years or more, and it's just so wonderful to see this great turnout too. And where's all the football fans? Oh yeah.
Close, so only 4 points ahead.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll have update. So I'm Bernard Borman. I'm the director of the ONRC, and this program of evening talks is one we've done for many years now. It's supported through the Rosamond Forestry Education Fund, and I'm going to let Tom speak here in a minute, but I want to first introduce our speaker for tonight. This is Alyssa Tapero, and she's with the Outer Coast Tsunami Program of the Washington Emergency Management Division, and she has a bachelor's degree in geosciences and history from PLU. That's an interesting combination. And her work focuses on mitigating the tsunami hazards, particularly along the coast of Washington through education, alerting, and response mitigation projects, and mapping and modeling. And before I turn it over to Alyssa, Tom?
Yeah, well, I think I just say a few words. As Bernard said, it's great to be back. Some of you may have been here, I don't know how many. 6 years ago, I gave a talk on the Cascadia subduction zone right here. And I said a little bit of the scientific basis for what it was all about and some historical perspective. And I think Alyssa's talk is basically gonna then continue that, talk a little bit more about this thing can happen, it will happen. When it happens, what are we gonna do about it? And how are we gonna minimize the impact? And I think what she's gonna tell us is a little bit better idea of what that might be and what we really need to be concerned about. So, Alyssa.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evenings, possibly away from your Monday night football, to listen to this talk. I'm really excited to be part of these kind of resuming these evening talks. Really excited to be up here and to be able to speak with all of you. So I'll get started in a second, but please, if you have questions, just raise your hands. This is really informal. We've got some materials over here to the side that you're welcome to grab, anytime during the presentation or afterwards. I brought plenty, so feel free to take extras if you've got family or friends that you want to give some extras to. So I'll be talking about Washington State's tsunami hazards. As was mentioned, so I am part of the Washington State Tsunami Program. I'm exactly 50% of it. There are only 2 of us. Why do we have a state tsunami program? Well, Washington has over 3,000 miles of coastline. That's including the inner and the outer coast. That includes 15 coastal counties, 15 coastal tribal nations that have some sort of coastal property. That's actually old. Now we know we have at least 175,000 people that live inside the inundation zone at any given time. That doesn't include the folks who travel in, doesn't include tourists at any given time. It's just the folks that we know are there on a permanent basis. We also have millions of tourists that visit every year, which I am sure you guys are all aware of here in Forks, who are usually very much not aware of any of the hazards that we have in Washington State. Then, of course, we have a huge maritime industry, including our Coast Guard, Navy, our huge ferry system, and all of these things, economic, cultural, all of these things that rely on our waterways and our coastlines. It's a big part of being part of Washington State. So essentially everything that the tsunami wave touches in Washington State is kind of our program's responsibility in one way or another. And to give an idea even more about why this program is so important, especially on the outer coast, is we have a lot of vulnerable populations here. On the outer coast, we have a higher population than in other parts of the state that are above 65, higher population that have one or more disabilities, a lot of folks who have ambulatory issues, who may not be able to run as fast as they need to run to get up a hill out of that inundation zone, who may have vision issues, may not be able to see well at night if they're having to evacuate at night, may not be able to hear well, if the sirens are going off or if there's an alert going on their phone, that kind of thing. So it's especially important out here on the outer coast where we have the highest risk anyway that we are serving these populations. And so that's why I'm out here in person. We want to make sure that we are talking to folks, learning about your communities, getting to know them so that we have an idea of your individual risks and vulnerabilities so that we can help you prepare, not just tell you what you should do, because we want to know what your community wants to do. So we, again, do a little bit of everything here in Washington, whatever relates to tsunamis. It's a lot of education and outreach, so going out and speaking to communities. You'll see us at a lot of events in the summer, especially kind of preparedness-related events. My team is the one that puts on the Great Washington Shakeout every year. It's the world's largest earthquake and tsunami drill in the world. I'll talk about that a little bit later. We also do a lot of kind of online stuff now that we are in the post-COVID or in COVID world, however you want to refer to that. So we do a lot online as well. And then things like tsunami work groups. We are the ones that installed all of the tsunami sirens. We maintain them, test them, make sure that every single day that they are connecting to the satellites, that they're ready to go if we do have to set them off. And then if we happen to have a tsunami event like we did back in January, we are the ones that are responding in the State Emergency Operations Center. We are the ones who are on social media pushing out a lot of messaging at the state level about here's what's going on, what does it mean, what does it mean for you in your certain area, what do you need to do, that kind of thing. And we work with just about everyone, so from the local level, cities, counties, tribes, all the way up to our international partners. We work a lot with British Columbia and Canada, and with federal partners like National Weather Service, FEMA, those kind of folks. So really, everyone that has some sort of stake in this game, we are working with constantly. So we never want to be kind of taking matters only into our own hands. We're always collaborating and looking for ways that we can get more kind of insight and get more folks into that process. So Washington is earthquake country. Washington actually has the second highest earthquake risk in the country. We are behind Alaska in that. So although California likes to say that they have the big earthquake risk, we have one too. And it's because we have this big subduction zone right off of our outer coast. So the Cascadia subduction zone, that subducting Juan de Fuca plate is moving under the North American plate right here, and that causes essentially a lot of our problems. That builds up pressure and gets locked in place for a long time, and then when that breaks, when that pressure releases, that's where we get those big offshore earthquakes. The subduction zone 1, so the big one that we refer to is that kind of big subduction zone quake. We get the deep quakes that are farther down in the subduction zone. Those don't usually do as much damage because they're so much deeper. So if you think about Nisqually in 2001, that was a deep quake. And then we also have crustal faults that are basically just littering the state, but especially running across the Puget Sound. And because those are so close to the surface, if they are large enough, if they kind of move the earth in the right way, they can also cause tsunamis. So you may, in the last about a month and a half, have seen stuff in the news about the Seattle fault and the tsunami that could cause, because DNR just released some inundation mapping and modeling for that. The point being, we have a lot of earthquake risk in Washington. Some of that risk can potentially cause tsunamis, some of it can't. But really our big one to focus on, especially for the outer coast, is that subduction zone. And just to give you an idea of what those fault lines look like. So this is all of kind of the known or active faults in Washington. As we can see, you've got the Cascadia subduction zone out here, which is essentially a lot of different fault lines kind of coming together. We get several that run through the Puget Sound. And then we have quite a few right here up through Clallam County in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So if you get shaking up here, a lot of times, if it's, not shaking that's lasting 5 minutes, something big off of the subduction zone, if it's, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, anywhere in there, it could be any of those faults that are kind of moving a little bit from time to time. So, whether you feel ground shaking or whether you get an alert on your phone, because we do have earthquake early warning here in Washington now, so you may get something on your phone telling you, ground shaking is, going to begin, drop cover and hold on. That is what we want you to do, is drop cover and hold on wherever you are. That's the safest thing to do here in the United States because our buildings, thankfully, are built to withstand just about any earthquake shaking that we can expect. So should we be in a room like this, and even if we had, say, Cascadia, big 9.0 shaking, there's not much chance that the building itself is going to collapse on us. Yes, the building might not pancake down like it does in some other countries. What we have to worry about more is just stuff falling on us. So the lights, the ceiling tiles, the glass breaking, things like that. So getting under a piece of furniture is still the best thing to do here in the United States. We don't recommend getting in a doorway anymore. One, because we don't necessarily know if that doorway is load-bearing or not. A lot of times they aren't. So they aren't actually any safer than any other part of the building. Two, sometimes there's a door in the doorway. And those swing back and forth during the earthquake. And although it sounds like it would be pretty simple, a lot of folks forget that. And sometimes you see videos of folks getting smacked in the face by the door. So just getting under something, still the safest thing to do. There are other suggestions depending on where you are, so something to just keep in mind, especially if you're out and about, if you walk into the grocery store or something. Just kind of look around and think, if there's an earthquake right now, where would I go? What would be the safe area? What would be the not safe area? I think that a lot of times when I'm in Costco and I'm like, oh, I would not want to be in an earthquake in Costco. So tsunamis are one of our biggest secondary hazards from earthquakes. They can be caused by a lot of things, essentially anything that displaces a large column or body of water within a large body of water. So a landslide into or underwater could cause one. Volcanic eruption that is underwater or that pushes mud or lava or whatever into the water could. But here in Washington, our biggest risk is an earthquake causing one. And this graphic here, this video is showing how a subduction zone specifically causes those tsunamis. So essentially this is what happens when we have a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. So the plates are locked, that pressure's building up, and then when it breaks, that plate that's kind of being pushed down, that's gotten stuck, snaps back up, and it lifts that whole column of water above it. Depending on where it is in the ocean, that could be upwards of 2 miles of water that it lifts up and then sends out in both directions. So that's why these kinds of tsunamis are so destructive. So this is what we saw in Japan in 2011. This happened to us in 1700, wiped out some native tribes, settlements they had on the water, killed some forests, left a lot of sand behind, and reached Japan. So these are the ones usually, if we hear something in the news about a tsunami killing a lot of people, it's usually something like this. It's generated by a lot of force. So tsunamis, they are a series of long waves. They are multiple waves, so not just one. And they can last anywhere between 12 to 24 hours or potentially longer, kind of depending on what that initiating factor is. What's important to remember is that the first wave is often neither the most destructive or the highest. I was recently reading a book about some of Hawaii's tsunamis they've had kind of the 1940s until now. And for them, and it's the same for us, Typically, it was actually the third or fourth waves that were the highest or were the most destructive. And unfortunately, a lot of folks by that time, because it's several hours into the event, assumed that it was over, and so they, returned to the inundation zone. So it's so important when we have events like this to leave the inundation zone and then listen to local emergency management, because they'll be the ones to tell you when it's safe to return. But typically, it's not going to be within probably that 24-hour period unless it's a very small event. They're also very fast and powerful. On land, tsunamis can move anywhere between 20 to 35 miles per hour. But that's not just kind of water moving. They're more like a moving wall of cement. And they pick up everything in their path. So once they reach shore, they've got sand and rocks and trees and cars. Everything that they pick up is in that water moving forward with them. So they're very, very dangerous. It's not something you can necessarily swim in or surf or anything like that. It's water that you definitely want to stay out of if you can. They also leave a ton of mixed and potentially toxic debris behind. So we saw this in Japan especially, that once the tsunami is done and it's kind of run its course, the danger isn't necessarily completely over because we have all of this debris. A lot of times it's on fire because it's houses that caught fire in the earthquake that have been lifted up, or it's gasoline in the water that's caught fire. And if the tsunami ruptures septic tanks or waste treatment plants or anything like that, it picks all of that up too. So they can leave behind a lot of really hazardous waste as well. Specifically talking about subduction zone quakes, so the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake and tsunami, we're looking at, it's a low probability event. It's one that doesn't happen often, but it has a really big impact when it does. So, we've been talking about it here in Washington for probably 3 decades now, and thankfully it hasn't happened yet, but that doesn't mean that we're wrong or that, we thought it would happen and it didn't. It's something that is still a possibility and will have a very big impact when it does happen. So we have 2 tsunami hazards here in Washington, yay for us. One is local tsunamis. So those are ones that occur from some initiating event here in Washington. If it is an earthquake that's caused them, it's an earthquake that we will feel. So it's something that happens close enough that we feel that ground shaking. And for a local event, that ground shaking is your first warning, your best warning, and potentially your only warning that a tsunami is on the way. Depending on how large that ground shaking is, how long it goes on, it could be that earthquake takes out some of our communication systems, that it knocks out internet or cell towers or whatever it is that in your area you might be getting tsunami alerts through. So essentially, if you feel that ground shaking, that is your warning. Don't wait to hear the sirens go off. Don't wait to get something on your phone or on your NOAA weather radio. Assume that a tsunami is on the way. Those waves for a local tsunami arrive in 3 hours or less. That's kind of just the rule. But if we're talking about a Cascadia quake, that's really more like 15 to 30 minutes. So a lot less than that 3 hours. There's also much more inundation because of that, because those waves haven't had much time for the energy to dissipate. So we see more inundation and much higher, more dangerous currents. For us, kind of here in the Clallam County area, the biggest local threat is the Cascadia subduction zone. If you look more at the Puget Sound, it kind of depends where you are. That big local threat might be one of the crustal faults, like the Seattle Fault or the Tacoma Fault. But out here, it's Cascadia. That's the one that's going to kick off something real big that'll arrive real fast. Distant tsunamis are ones that the initiating event is somewhere else in the Pacific Basin, and then they travel here usually many, many hours later. So Japan in 2011, that was obviously a local tsunami for them, and it was a distant tsunami for us. It arrived 12 or 13 hours later. Because we won't feel that ground shaking, because it's happened somewhere else, official tsunami alerts are our primary and really our only warning for those. So that's why it's so important to be signed up for those alerts, to make sure that you know this thing is coming. There's usually 3 or more hours between when that initiating event happens and when those waves reach us. Again, it depends on where you are, where that event happened, but our biggest distant threat is Alaska. Alaska has a lot of big earthquakes pretty often, and a lot of those have caused tsunamis in the past. With Alaska, especially kind of up here in Clallam County, you're really only looking at about 3.5 hours. So a lot more time than Cascadia, but not a ton of times. That's why those alerts are so important. It's a much smaller threat, again, because the waves have a lot more time to, for that energy to dissipate. But we will be releasing mapping and modeling soon for an Alaska event that I think will show, especially in some of kind of the low-lying beach areas, that for an Alaska event, we will still see some inundation and definitely some really high currents. So it's not something necessarily that the folks in the Puget Sound need to worry about, but it is something on the outer coast we want to keep in the back of our minds, that distant events can still be dangerous. So Cascadia, the big one. If you are not aware, so this subduction zone is about 700 miles long, and it breaks, or basically snaps, between every 300 to 600 years. That last great rupture was in 1700. That was about a 9.0 event. Obviously, we don't know for sure because we didn't have instruments out here at that time, but it was about a 9.0. And we have between a 15 to 25% chance of Cascadia giving us another real big quake in the next 50 years. So that is definitely one of our higher chance fault lines. Definitely something we want to be aware of. We'd be looking at anywhere between kind of a magnitude 8.0 to 9 or higher. We have not had anything higher than a 9 in a really long time on the Cascadia fault line. It only does that once every 10,000 years or so. But we're still looking at a pretty big quake. So that shaking is going to last for between 3 to 6 minutes. Who here was in Washington for Nisqually? Yeah, okay. Nisqually was 30 seconds. Yeah. It didn't feel like that for me, at least. Felt a lot longer, but that was 30 seconds of shaking. Cascadia is probably about 5 to 6. It'll also then, of course, be followed by a major tsunami that'll hit the outer coast, depending on where you are, between 10 to 15 to about 30 minutes. And one thing to remember with that estimate is that includes the 5 to 6 minutes of shaking. So while you are drop covered and hold on, which we want you to do because it's going to be very intense shaking, that wave's already coming. So it's so important that once you can move, you are up and you are heading to your evacuation route. Something also to keep in mind out here is that because that locked plate is snapping up, we will see subsidence. So there will be parts of the outer coast that are permanently subsided, potentially kind of between 5 to 7 feet. There will be parts of the inner coast that potentially lift up. So this is an event that will kind of fundamentally change how we recognize our coastline. That's not necessarily something we think about. We think about this event as a thing that happens, and then we respond, and then we recover. But this is kind of going to live on in our kind of cultural psyche. We're also going to have a lot of aftershocks. Japan is still having aftershocks from the 2011 event. So we'll see a lot of very big aftershocks in the kind of weeks and months following, and then potentially smaller aftershocks for many years to follow, which I am not excited for. This is also, if you couldn't tell from the graphic, this will be a West Coast event. So Washington won't be alone, which is kind of comforting, but it does also mean that all our neighbors to the north, our neighbors to the south are going to be impacted, and that we will all be responding together, and the rest of the country will be responding to help all of us at once. Cascadia has given us 41 major earthquakes in the last 10,000 years. So this kind of gives you an idea of those earthquakes and more or less when they occurred in the timeline of human history. So we're way down here. The longer lines are those 9.0 or above, and then the shorter lines are kind of 8.0. just gives you an idea of kind of how often this happens. This isn't a great graphic up here, but essentially we know when these occurred because we can take deep core samples out in the ocean and then on shore, and we can essentially see the deposits of sand that these tsunamis left behind. You actually, if you go to Willapa Bay or Copalis in that area and dig down into the rivers, you can see the 1700 deposit. It's about that thick. So this is something that really is in our history that you could go and see proof that these things have happened. But as you can see, they're not occurring in a nice, every 300 years or something. They happen when they're going to happen, and so that's why it's hard for us to say exactly when the next one's going to happen or exactly what our risk is.
Can you tell us what turbidite evidence is? Does it have to do with turbidity or?
Turbidites are essentially underwater landslides. And so when those landslides occur, we can essentially date them to potentially what earthquake caused them, depending on where they are in kind of that cycle of, sand, mud, tsunami deposit, sand, mud. Sometimes, there are several volcanic eruptions in there that make it very easy to date things between them as well. And that's just one way. We also use tree rings from the ghost forest down in Copalis. We date those and a lot of other evidence. So all of that put together gives us kind of this idea of what Cascadia has been doing throughout our human history.
Love the first event. The first slide, you start with that.
Yeah.
Something significant.
So this is a truncated version of a Department of Natural Resources simulation. All of these are on YouTube, so you can watch them to your heart's content or not watch them if they're a little unnerving. Essentially, this is showing basically the standard scenario that we plan to at the state level. So it is a 9.0 earthquake off the Cascadia subduction zone, and then the tsunami that's following. What this video is showing is the wave amplitude, so how high the waves offshore are estimated to be, and then how low, so the trough of the waves. A couple things to note. So the darker red, the higher the waves, but this model does cap off at 10 feet or higher. So could be 10 feet, could be 20 feet, could be 30 feet. It's just not a fine enough simulation to show anything more than that. And then same with the trough of the wave. So it could be 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. In some places, we'll definitely see, the seabed pulling away completely, boats, sitting on the bottom, that kind of thing. And then it's showing time since earthquake in minutes and hours, obviously a bit sped up. The full simulation, I believe, goes for 8 hours, but again, it's a little truncated here, just to kind of give you an idea of what those waves look like. What's really interesting with this one is not just seeing how quickly that first wave hits the outer coast, but how those waves play out in all of our kind of little inlets and channels and things like that. So we see the first wave, coming here to the outer coast, and then the minute it hits, Grace Harbor, Willapa Bay, those kind of areas, especially once it moves into the Puget Sound, you see it start to kind of refract off of all of the channels, and especially where we have kind of deep water and very tight inlets and things like that. So especially in the Puget Sound and kind of inner coast, we'll probably see very, very high currents, whirlpools, areas like that where even when the tsunami itself is technically done, there aren't any more waves, the currents themselves are still going to be very dangerous. And again, we'll see multiple waves as well, so this model only shows up to 8 hours, but we will see waves probably for 12 hours or more, kind of depending on the severity of the event. But again, these are all online, so they are available. And then based on that same event, this is a DNR graphic showing wave arrival times in certain areas and the kind of approximate height of that wave offshore. So I've highlighted just a few here. So Nia Bay is about 20 minutes Again, that's including that 5 to 6 minutes of shaking with a wave amplitude offshore of about 20, 21 feet. Port Angeles has longer because, again, that wave's got to go through part of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, so a little bit longer there, about 20 feet again. Down in La Push, 10 minutes. So that is why it is so important that when you feel that ground shaking, you do not hesitate. Don't wait for the siren, don't wait for an alert, don't wait to think, is this Cascadia, is this something else? Because in the moment, you're not gonna know. Assume it's something worth evacuating for and evacuate. Because it's not a lot of time. And then we also, through DNR, have inundation maps. So this is showing the height of the water above whatever the ground is in that location. So this is kind of just showing what we could expect. Again, this is a 9.0 event. There's a very good chance that the next one we have may be smaller than this, but this is what we plan to because we want to be conservative. So just to give you an idea, so the U.S. Coast Guard station at Nia Bay is looking at about 19 feet on land of tsunami water. Down here, we've got 39 feet. You can see it'll go up the river channels. DNR has some modeling and mapping for that, and I know they are working on more. So something to keep in mind, especially for the Nia Bay area, we may see them cut off. That's if we have kind of this major big event. For a smaller one, it's probably likely that the waves will not touch in the middle there, but it is something to keep in mind. Something else is that Highway 101 runs through a lot of inundation zone spots. Just driving up here, I was like, ooh, I am right by the water. It's right there. So even if Highway 101 survives the 5 to 6 minutes of shaking, there's a good chance it will be inundated or washed out. So something to keep in mind there depending on your location. So here's Port Angeles, kind of in the lower Elwha area. We're looking at anywhere from 16 feet to 5, depending on where you are. At East Hook, ooh, I would not want to be up there. I'm just gonna be honest. That is completely inundated. It's a long walk to high ground from there. So if you're walking at East Hook, just be aware. Be ready to hoof it if you need to. And then down kind of in the ferry terminal area between 14 to 15 feet. So a lot of inundation, but thankfully there is also a lot of high ground in Port Angeles. You just have to be able to get to it quickly. And then just really quick, a third, kind of showing Clallam Bay. Wave arrival time about 30 minutes. And then, again, just showing that anywhere where we have big kind of river channels or places where the waves can move upstream, we are going to see that. Not necessarily miles and miles inland, but if you've got riverfront property near the shore, just be aware that that's something that you could see happen. And that is something that happened in Japan that they, in some areas, were not completely prepared for.
Has this been done for the La Push?
Yes. So these are all just screenshots of a much larger map. They're all available online. The only real problem is they are very big files. We're working on that with DNR, trying to get them a little more kind of mobile phone friendly. But yes, all of this is available online, and if you can't find your house or whatever you're looking for, I'm always totally happy to help too. So just, is that one gonna play? There we go. Just to give you some ideas of what a local earthquake and tsunami could look like. So I've been talking about Japan, 2011. That was a very close subduction zone earthquake for them, and a big tsunami that followed very quickly. So it's a very good example of what could happen here. Obviously, the coastlines are a little different, and they actually were far more prepared for earthquakes and tsunamis than we are right now. But it's a very similar event to what we would see. So These videos are from Japan, and what we would see from the tsunami waves and from the earthquake itself, damage to a lot of kind of our underground systems, so fuel piping and pumps, potentially power loss for systems that are outside the inundation zone if there's still critical infrastructure within the inundation zone that is damaged. We'll see a lot of damage to our bridges, overpasses, and major roadways. Our infrastructure's old, and it's only very, very slowly being updated. So if you rely on any bridges to get around out here or overpasses, I would not hang your preparedness hopes on those being accessible after an event like this, because there's a very good chance that regardless of whether they are completely destroyed or not, they're not going to be immediately usable. We'll also obviously see a lot of damage to our port and marina infrastructure, and that's even for a smaller event. So something to keep in mind if you are connected in any way to kind of our maritime economy. To compare it to Japan, so again, they were a little more prepared than we are, but even so, they lost over 2,000 roads and 56 bridges just from the earthquake itself, and then 28,000 ships and more than 300 ports. So it was a big economic blow, cultural blow, social blow for them. They've recovered remarkably well, but it definitely took a really long time.
Can you explain the swirling of the water? What
Yeah.
exactly is going on there?
So these are whirlpools, and let me see where it is. So this is a boat. So that gives you an idea of how big these whirlpools are. Tsunamis cause very, very high currents. And anywhere where the land starts to narrow or the bathymetry changes, you can get these giant whirlpools that form. And in some of the DNR simulations, especially for the inner coast in kind of the San Juan Islands areas, you can actually see the whirlpools form in the simulations.
Yeah, there's a building right there at the bottom.
Yeah.
Wow, this is an aerial view. I want to see what happens to that boat because it goes off the screen.
So yeah, this is something we'll definitely be seeing again, especially in the inner coast. Even if we have a smaller event, because it just takes high enough currents going through, really small channels to kick up those currents even higher and to get those whirlpools forming. Not something you would want to experience if you're on the water.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is there any record of how high the waves were in the Japanese tsunami?
Yes, it obviously depends on the area, but they saw in some places kind of inundation miles inland. They have very, very flat coastal plains, but also I think 30 or 40 feet or more just in the depth of the water. There are stories of some folks who went to the roofs of multi-story buildings who were washed away or who were almost washed away. And there are some pretty harrowing videos out there if you go into a YouTube dive. So yeah, they saw a lot of inundation for sure. And again, just to give you an idea of what it looked like in Japan, these are some pictures from it. This is the wave overtopping one of their seawalls that was built to withstand what they thought was their kind of worst case scenario, and unfortunately was not. And just evidence of kind of the force of those waves, their ability to lift up entire vessels and deposit them on buildings and on freeways and things like that. So a lot of damage.
Just from that, just from looking at the level of that water behind the road, that's probably a 30-foot difference.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, and this is a screenshot of a pretty famous video that is also pretty rough to watch because you can see cars, trying to drive away and stuff. And then just to give you an idea again of what it could look like here, this is kind of one of their seaside towns before and after, and it essentially was washed away because everything was at sea level, essentially. And again, they have done a remarkable job in rebuilding. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but I do think it's important to kind of show that we have had an event like ours in recent history, and it is something that will happen here, just hopefully not in our lifetimes. To touch on distant tsunamis, so again, I said Alaska is kind of our biggest distant risk. They have had more than 80 observed tsunamis in the last couple hundred years. They have tons of big earthquakes all the time. Now, all of those cause tsunamis, but they make us kind of check and keep our eyes on them. So there's a good chance that our next sort of big event that actually causes maybe some damage and some inundation will be from Alaska. So if you know anyone from Alaska, you can thank them for that. We don't have a lot of our kind of maximum Alaska scenario inundation mapping released yet. That's coming soon, next few months, I think, so keep an eye out for that. But we have been working with Westport Marina on some kind of site-specific work, and so we've got some modeling just for that area. And I show it because this is the first time that we have kind of actual proof that an Alaska event in some areas is gonna still do quite a bit of damage. So not nearly as much inundation as Cascadia, obviously. But you can see here, so the kind of yellowish is inundation onshore. And it's anywhere from, maybe 2 to 3 feet to as much as, maybe 3 or 4 or 5. But again, that is waves potentially moving 20 to 30 miles an hour, like a wall of cement hitting you. That's not placid water. So Westport will still see quite a bit of damage from an Alaska event potentially. And I'll be very interested once DNR releases the mapping for the full outer coast to see what some of our other very low-lying coastal areas look like as well. And then who here remembers the Tonga eruption? No one? Yeah. So yeah, our most recent tsunami was actually January. For those who are not aware, so the eruption of the volcano in Tonga that kind of caught the news because it was very unexpected and it was actually so large that it registered on satellites and shockwave, pressure wave traveled around the world. That created a tsunami that actually traveled all the way to the west coast. And Washington was under a tsunami advisory, I'll go over the alert levels in a minute, for 11 hours. So that was a very busy Saturday for me. So this is kind of just the proof that not every tsunami is caused by an earthquake. Sometimes they throw a loop for us and we get something like this. We get a volcanic eruption causing a tsunami. So here's Tonga all the way down here. It was between a 10 and 12 hour travel time, depending on where on the west coast you were. California, as you'll see in a second, actually saw quite a bit of inundation and damage. We did see a tsunami here. I don't know if anybody on the beach actually noticed it, but we saw it. It happened. But no damage. So it arrived at about high tide. It was like 10 in the morning. So we saw a tsunami of about 13.5 inches in La Push, 11 inches in Nia Bay, and 9.8 in Port Angeles. Not super impressive, I know, but again, still distant tsunami arriving here. We were lucky. There's something about kind of our offshore trench from the Cascadia subduction zone. It actually helps us out sometimes, where it channels some of that kind of energy coming from a tsunami from the south and pushes it away from us. So we didn't see as much damage we didn't see any damage, whereas California did. So these are 2 videos I borrowed off of Twitter from California from that same event. Yeah. So this is, I think both of them are Santa Cruz. So the one on the left I like because it just shows what those 3 to 4 foot waves could look like. There's a lot of force behind them, We had people on social media that day who were like, 1 foot wave, 3 foot waves. Like, I've seen that before. And it's like, yes, you have. But these are different. These aren't normal wind waves. These aren't tide waves. They are a different force altogether. There's a lot of force behind those waves. I wouldn't have wanted to be on that beach that time. And then I like this video of Santa Cruz Marina because it shows this really placid looking inundation. You know, it almost looks like you could just wade through that water if you wanted to, until it zooms in and you see that in the back of the video, that water is actually lifting up those vehicles and moving them around the parking lot. So that takes some force. You would not want to be in that water. You wouldn't be able to stay on your feet in that water. And you also, because it's all brown and sludgy, you don't know what else is in that water. There's probably a lot of debris in there that you could injure yourself on, trip on, get caught on and pulled under. So even though the water looks safe, really good chance that it would not be safe for a person. Not to mention that those vehicles were probably not looking so great once the water receded. I doubt any of them were. Yep, the salt water. So that was probably not fun for any of the folks who owned those. Santa Cruz saw about $6.5 million in damage. Ventura Harbor about 1 to 2 million. So cheaper than the Japanese tsunami, which they had about 100 million in damage for that one. But still, even with 10 to 12 hours lead time, this is the kind of damage they saw. So let's talk about how do you know a tsunami is coming, especially if you don't have your phone on you. Should we have something happen, we do have some natural warning signs we can rely on. The first and best is obviously that ground shaking. I know this says long or strong shaking on the coast, but I don't necessarily, if I'm on the beach and the ground shakes and it's enough to maybe throw me to my feet or to make me concerned, I don't necessarily know how long or how strong it needs to be. So I'm going to just say, if you are on the coast and you feel ground shaking, the minute you can move after that safely, get to high ground. Assume a tsunami's coming, and if a tsunami's coming, you've saved yourself. And if you haven't, you've walked your evacuation route, which is awesome. Better to be safe than sorry. If you are on the beach and there is no ground shaking because it's not an earthquake-caused tsunami or it's a distant tsunami coming here, there are a couple different things. The water could pull away suddenly, much faster than the tide moves in or out. You might hear a very loud roaring from the ocean, so like a freight train. It's going to sound different than obviously the normal crashing of the waves. Or you might just see the water acting abnormally. A lot of us grew up around here. We know how the water works. We know what the tides look like. If the water's being weird and you get that feeling of like, I don't know what's going on, just get to high ground. That's just practice your evacuation route. Better that way than to stick around and have to wait for the sudden rise of the ocean to be coming at you. We also have a lot of ways for you to get official alerts, though. Again, especially important for those distant events where we don't have the ground shaking. Some of those alerts come to your smartphone. Some of them will be on TV or radio. Another great thing is to have a NOAA weather radio. A lot of alerts go to that. That's honestly one of the best ways to get alerts of all sorts. And then if you happen to be near one of the tsunami sirens and we are under a tsunami warning, you will hear those go off. Do not rely on those, though, because they only have about a 500-foot audible radius in any direction, and that depends on wind and rain and yeah. So they are really for people on the beach who maybe don't have cell service, don't have their radio with them, or tourists who have no idea what's going on. Those are purely outdoor warning systems. But for everything else, we really want to make sure that you've got your phone on you, you're signed up for alerts, that you know you're going to get them in multiple different ways. These are some of the great ways to do that. I suggest going to mil.wa.gov/alerts. We've outlined all the great ways that you can get alerts there, walk you through how to do that so it's nice and simple. At the end here, I've got a QR code you can scan with your phone if you want to do it that way. A lot of good options. And as I mentioned earlier, we have earthquake early warning now here in Washington. So there's a couple different ways you'll get that on your phone. But basically it goes through wireless emergency alerts, so the same system that sends you Amber alerts. And so if you, perchance, have turned off the emergency alerts on your phone because you got an Amber Alert at 2 a.m. and it woke you up and you were mad, please check your phone to make sure that those are turned on, because that's how you will get the earthquake alerts, that's how you will get a tsunami alert, that's how you'll get lots of other things. If you're not sure how to do that, because some phones make it really hard to find that, on that mil.wa.gov/alert site, we've outlined how to check on different phones. So, and we're always happy to help if you still can't find it. Just to give you an idea of where there are sirens, these are all of the locations within Clallam County, although I believe Kalaloch is getting one of their own as well. They are primarily in kind of very populated or potentially populated areas of the beach. There are a lot of kind of rules and regulations about where we can put them. So this is kind of where they are. You'll hear them go off once a month with the Westminster chimes. That's us testing them to make sure they work. And on the Great Washington Shakeout, so October 10th, October 20th, sorry. It's been a long day.
21st.
Last year was the 21st. This year is the 20th. It's the third Thursday. You will hear them make the scary wailing sound. Please don't call 911. They are supposed to be doing that. It's the one day of the year that we test them with the actual wailing sound.
Is there any particular time for that?
It will be around 10:20 a.m. Should be right at that, but it might be a few minutes off, but should be right there. The tsunami warning centers in Palmer, Alaska, and Honolulu, Hawaii are the ones that let us know if there is a tsunami on the way somewhere in the world. For us here in Washington, it is the National Tsunami Warning Center, so they issue all tsunami products for essentially all of North America, all of our states and territories, with the exception of Hawaii. So they are constantly scanning, constantly looking out for earthquakes that might cause a tsunami. If one occurs, their seismic sensors pick it up, let them know that something's happened. Within 5 minutes, their computers have to determine whether that earthquake could have caused a tsunami. If it could, they send out that bulletin that says, hey, something happened, here's what we think might have occurred, it's gonna be a tsunami, it's not gonna be a tsunami, whatever. And then over the next several hours, they monitor tide gauges and buoys out there to wait for that first wave to hit them. So if we are under, say, a tsunami advisory, and you get that first bulletin that says, hey, we think something might have happened, and then you don't hear anything again for maybe like an hour, that's why. Because we are waiting for that wave, if one has been created, to hit those sensors. And that is the worst hour of my job. If nothing hits the sensors, if there was no wave created, then that tsunami alert is canceled. If something has been created, then we can update those bulletins and say, okay, here's what we think is coming, here's what we think wave arrival times you're going to have in La Push and Nia Bay and Port Angeles, kind of what you can expect. We have 4 tsunami alert levels. I will run through these kind of quickly. Essentially, the only ones you need to worry about are watch, advisory, and warning. Watch essentially means watch out. Something might be on the way. We want you to stay tuned to local emergency management, to the ways that you get your tsunami alerts, because it's either going to be upgraded to an advisory or warning, or it's going to be canceled. A watch will always do one of the two. Advisory, which we were under for Tonga, essentially means that a tsunami is on the way, or it's occurring, but it is primarily of concern for folks very near or in the water. So the maritime community, people who might be right on the shore, clam diggers. We had a clam dig going in Pacific County that day. We don't evacuate for an advisory. We don't set off the sirens. We don't send out wireless emergency alerts. We get the information out other ways so that we don't have a big panic and everybody trying to evacuate. But essentially, we just want folks to, dock their boats, get to high ground, get out of the water. Warning is the one where we do everything. We hit the sirens, we send out the wireless emergency alerts, we're on TV, we're on social media, letting folks know, okay, something big is potentially on the way. We want folks out of the inundation zones. We're closing beaches or trying to, closing roads, getting people out as quickly as we can. So that's the one that you primarily want to worry about unless you do find yourself by the water quite a bit in a maritime way. And I'm actually gonna run through these. So once you receive an alert or you feel the ground shaking or notice the beach doing something weird, you have to know what to do. So grab your go bag, which I'm hoping you have with you, and head to high ground. We don't want you to evacuate by car if you can help it. One, because for a local earthquake, there's a good chance you won't be able to get to high ground in your car. There's going to be trees down and power lines and potentially, bits of road washed out or, bridges out and things like that. And for a distant event where we have more time and you are probably not evacuating as far, we want to leave the roads open for, emergency personnel, for ambulances, and for folks who cannot, evacuate by foot for whatever reason. So if you can evacuate by foot, plan to do so, practice doing that. There's a good chance that for a local event you will be doing that whether you want to or not. And then of course, know what you're going to do once you get to high ground. Do you have your go bag with you? Are you meeting up with other people or trying to after that? If you have cell service, are you calling someone in another state to let them know you're okay, and are your family members calling them as well? Kind of depends on how big the event is kind of depends on how big the event is, what communication systems will be working. And evacuating will take longer than you think. It probably is going to take longer than I think even, and I'm always thinking about this. So know where your closest evacuation routes are. We have a lot of pedestrian evacuation walk maps for this area. So if there's one available, print it out, study it, look at it, know where you're going to go. If there isn't one for your area, look at some of the other maps or talk to your local emergency management and kind of figure out, okay, if I'm home, I got to go up the big hill or I have to, walk down the road a bit and then go up, whatever that is, and then practice. For whatever reason, we always have tsunamis in the middle of the night, so there's a good chance that you might be, evacuating in the dark, possibly in the rain, given that it's Washington. After 5 to 6 minutes of intense shaking, you're probably not going to be thinking super clearly. So the more you can make it instinct instead of something you have to dredge back up out of your mind, the better. And please do not waste time confirming anything on social media or Facebook with friends, with relatives, or with secondary sources. Just once the shaking stops, get out as quickly as you can. You can find all of your maps, including the pedestrian evacuation walk maps, on mil.wa.gov/tsunami. And you can also use the Department of Natural Resources interactive geoportal to look up addresses and see what your hazards are and whether you're in the inundation zone or not, and kind of build a more specific plan from there. I probably don't have to tell any of you this, but once you get to high ground, plan to be there for a while. Highway 101 is the one major road in and out, and there's a good chance that it's going to be washed out in multiple places. I don't mean to be grim, but that's just kind of the truth. There's a good chance that you and your community will be the ones responding for yourselves for days, weeks, potentially more than a month, depends on the size of the event. So, know how you're going to get your emergency alerts. Know how you and your loved ones are going to meet up and take care of each other. Do you have a go bag ready and with you? Do you have multiple go bags? And even more importantly, do you have a go bag you can carry? The one in my car is like 30 pounds. It's huge. It's stuffed with absolutely everything I could think of. And I can't take that with me here. I don't want to drag it with me every work day. So in my little, day bag that's got my laptop and my lunch and stuff, I have just the very bare essentials. That way if something happens when I'm out here, I can mostly care for myself. So think about that too. Make sure that your go bag has what you need in it and that you can carry it. And if you've checked off all of these and you're like, yep, I am totally ready, my family's totally ready, then start thinking about community preparedness. And who you you might have to also help either out of the goodness of your heart or because those are the folks that are at high ground with you. So Go Kits, that's the stuff you're going to take with you in an emergency, whether it's a fire or evacuating for a tsunami. Only a few days worth of supplies. Does not have to be a 30-pound bag like I have in my car. Just the bare minimum, but make sure it's whatever you need. Spare glasses and medication and anything else that's going to get you through a couple of days. You might not be comfortable, but it can get you through. And then have stuff at home as well. So, if you are not in the inundation zone and you're not going to have to evacuate, or you're hoping you don't have to evacuate, do you have enough supplies that you can take care of yourself for that couple of weeks until the county can get there, until the state can get there, the National Guard can get there, whomever that happens to be? Because this is, again, going to be a very big event, and you're going to be on your own for a while. So whatever you can do to be more resilient will help you and help your community. And when we talk about tsunamis especially, think about those in your family, your friends, in your community who may need help evacuating. I'm not saying that when we have a major event, you're going to have to run down the road and get someone and lift them on your shoulders, but it's important to think about these folks and to have a plan in place as much as you can as a community, at the city level, the county level, and if you don't have a plan or you feel like there's not enough of a plan being made, I am always happy to help champion for you that gets done. So again, the DNR GeoPortal is a great resource, not super user-friendly, so I'm happy to help if you're having issues with it. You can type in your address and look stuff up. It's pretty cool. And it's got a lot of information, not just hazards, but all of kind of DNR's, any data they have, they cram in here. So that's dnr.gov/geology portal, but if you just search DNR GeoPortal in Google or whatever, you'll find that. It'll pop up. So that's very cool. Not mobile friendly, unfortunately, but otherwise pretty good. I mentioned the Great Washington Shakeout earlier. So that this year is at 10:20 a.m. on October 20th. It's always the third Thursday in October. This is the largest earthquake and tsunami drill in the world. So it's not just Washington, it's a lot of states, it's like 100 countries or something, just millions and millions of people all practicing drop, cover, and hold on together on the same day. Here in Washington, it's also a tsunami drill because we have tsunami risk. And so again, the tsunami sirens will be making the wailing sound at about 10:20 a.m. Might be a little bit of a delay, but at about that time. So just a heads up there, it's a great time to practice your evacuation routes. We love, if you are taking part in Shakeout in any way, shape, or form, to have you register because that helps us count how many folks are taking part. And then we can make sure that we are counting it, getting funding, when we are doing things in the future, that we are providing enough resources, that kind of thing. So check out shakeout.org/Washington. I've also got some little cards over here that have the information as well. So in closing, as scary as some of this sounds and immense as some of it sounds, and it will be pretty immense, you can survive if you're prepared and if your community has prepared and is resilient. There are some crazy stories out of Japan in 2011 and the Indian Ocean in 2004 of folks who survived completely unbelievable situations in those earthquakes and tsunamis. We continue to hear stories about folks surviving completely unbelievable situations. So you absolutely can survive. You just probably won't be comfortable. These are kind of our big main websites here. So mil.wa.gov/alerts, again, is all things alerts in Washington. Your local alerts, sign up for city and county, earthquake, tsunami, anything you can think of, we've got on that website. mil.wa.gov/preparedness is all of our preparedness information, some of which I've got over here. There are a lot more materials on this website for getting prepared as an individual, as a family, as a business or organization or community. And then mil.wa.gov/tsunami is all of our tsunami information. It links to a lot of DNR's stuff because their website's not quite as user-friendly as ours. So there's a lot of really cool stuff there as well if you're looking to learn more about the sirens or the maps or some of the efforts that we are working on to help mitigate some of these risks. And if, barring all of that, if you can't find what you're looking for, if you're having trouble with something, you can always email myself, or I can connect you with someone who might be able to answer your questions. I've got my cards over here as well. So thank you.
All right, Alyssa, thank you very much. I suspect there'll be a few questions.
You're familiar with La Push and how the Cooley River comes from the harbor
Mhm.
and goes upstream. So in a Cascadia earthquake, how far up the river is that going to go?
That's a good question. I do not believe we have modeling up that river yet, but that's something that DNR is working on. Essentially all of our models stop kind of right up in the river channels. They're working on modeling up as far up the rivers as they can. It really, it's a terrible answer, but it really depends kind of on the, form of the river there, the geology, the waves. We do know that tsunami waves can travel up rivers potentially several miles. They lose a lot of energy doing that, especially depending on kind of how steep the river channel is. So I cannot say with certainty what it would look like there, but it is something to be aware of if you're kind of near the river, maybe, within that first mile or two.
It's only a mile.
Oh, is it? Okay, yeah. So,
But it reaches the other rivers that feed into
yeah.
it. Yeah.
There actually are some estimates of how far up the river. Well, actually, the most extreme ones, they do penetrate about a mile up the Salt Lake and Bogoshiel.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, but it would depend on, what's the state of the tide?
Right.
Is it high tide or low tide, because it's gonna be on top of that. What's the river level? So it's.
For what it's worth, the published inundation zone map stops short of 3 rivers.
Hmm.
For what it's worth.
Yeah.
So, so it's, with kind of any of the river channels, it's something to be aware of. I don't think we would see a ton of inundation too far up. But it happened in Japan. It caught them unawares in some locations. Folks that thought they were kind of safely far enough up the river, and it turned out they were not. So it's worth being aware of. And if it's not in the modeling, I know DNR is working on it. Or they can sometimes, depending on if they have the modeling, they can kind of look at it even if it's not on their official maps. So I can also hook you up with that team as well.
Are there maps of the, like lacustron deposits, the blue clay left over from the glaciers? Because they say that, the earthquake would liquefy that. I mean, I know people know about them on Highway 101 at the Bogoshiel Slide, Lost Creek, and places like that. But that would be major places to know. I don't know if DNR has something like that or not. If they
Yeah,
have-
so I don't know if they have kind of the official fancy maps for liquefaction, but their liquefaction data is in the geoportal. So that's a layer you can turn on and you can kind of see what any specific area's liquefaction susceptibility is. And they've got quite a few layers that are kind of geologic in nature. So you could definitely kind of overlay those and look at that for sure, yeah. And that's something, when they do the modeling for Cascadia, that's something they take into account, is kind of the liquefaction modeling and everything that we know so far for an area. Well, I've got plenty of materials left, so again, take as many as you like. A lot of the resources I mentioned are listed in those, or are easily findable through those, so Any other questions? You can always email me too.
Okay, well, I forgot to mention, there are bathrooms here right down this hall if
I'm
if
pretty
you've been
good looking
holding it
food.
the whole time here. And there's more coffee and take some cookies on the way out. Thank you all for coming. It's really wonderful to see you again. And we will start trying to do more of these evening talks on a more regular basis.
Great, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was very good. Perfect follow-on from what I did.
Yeah,
Perfect follow-on.
you had all the answers. There weren't that many questions left.
Thank you very much so much.